And let's have a look at Pyfa. So what I'm going to do first here, I'm going to give you all a crash course. I'm taking out a fleet tonight. I want to fly hurricanes. So I'm going to build a hurricane fit and show you all what that looks like here, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation. So here we go. I'm sorry. I'm in the fittings tab, and I've got options for every type of ship in the game as well as some structures. I'm going to fit a combat battlecruiser, and specifically I want a hurricane, and I'm going to build a brand new fit. So I'm going to click this little green plus here next to hurricane. Now you see if I hover, I can see that our hurricane has got a medium projectile turret damage and rate of fire bonus. It's very handy, as well as being able to use command bursts and having a bonus to range. You see I've got existing Pyfa fits over here. This is my 6th hurricane fit. And I've got a new tab here in the middle, which is showing me the fitting slots for the hurricane. I got 7 high, 4 mid, and 6 low slots on my hurricane. Now, what we're going to do next is I'm going to put a single gun on here, and we'll talk about what has changed. So I'm searching in the Market tab for the kind of gun that I want. You can also navigate through the menus here. Remember how we talked about small, medium, and large modules, and then extra large for caps. So here, instead of searching 720, I've gone through the menu, and I've gotten to where I can see both 650mm and 720mm artillery of various kinds. I like T2, so I'm going to put T2. I'm going to put a single T2 gun on here to start out with. Now, if we look up at the right here, top right, you can see I've got 6 turret hardpoints. That's what this 0 of 6 is. 3 launcher hardpoints. I've got up to 5 drones, and I've got 400 calibration available. And then down here, I've got 500 CPU and 1,425 power grid, and they're 0% used. And then I've got 40 meter cube drone bay, and I've got 40 megabits per second drone bandwidth. My tank is 22.6k EHP right now, and that is against Omni damage. You can modify what kind of damage. So right now it's 25% of each type of damage, but if you know you're going to fight Amar, you could say, hey, I'm going to fight against Scorch. You see my tank went up a little bit because I've got stronger resists overall at the moment against Scorch. But I always use uniform because I don't know what I'm going to be fighting. We'll talk about some of this other stuff down here in a minute. But that's what we want from a fitting perspective. So I'm going to put a gun on here. I'd like to just double click. You can click and drag, but I'll double click. You can see that both my sliders for power grid and CPU went up, and I've also got 1 of 6 turret slots used. So I'm using 15.66% of my power grid, 4.8% of my CPU. I'm going to go ahead and drop several more turrets on here, and then we'll do some fun stuff. Whoa, look at that. Look how much power grid I'm using. I'm using 94% of my power grid, even though I'm only using 29% of my CPU. So these guns really use up a lot of this ship's power grid, which is going to be a problem. But we'll show you how to get around that in a moment. Now, right now, if you look at my firepower, my weapon DPS is 0. Why is that? I've got 6 guns on the ship. Well, I haven't picked a type of ammo. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to do this the fast way. I'm going to left click on the first one, and then I'm going to hold the shift key and left click on the last one. And that selects all of my guns at once. You can also shift and hit the arrow down. You can control click, or you can do each gun individually. But for me, I like to shift click and select them all. Then I'm going to right click. What kind of ammo do I want to use? I want to use EMP. I'm going to model EMP, and I always use faction ammo for PvP. So I'm going to load charges here, and I'm going to load Republic Fleet EMPM. Now I got all kinds of cool stuff going on. So you can see my firepower is now 322 DPS, and if I hover over it I can see the percentages of each damage type that it's doing. And then up here I've got extra columns. So I've got range, it's optimal plus fall off, so 18.8 km optimal plus 27.3 km fall off, and then tracking speed of 8.36. Which I think that's expressed in rads, I don't know. More is better. That's what you want. You want higher tracking speed. 8.36 is not very good. And then we got the price. So they're 1.56 million each. We're going to keep going and then we'll stop for questions. Actually, if anybody has any questions now, please jump in. Okay, let's keep going. So the next thing I'm going to throw on here is a damage control. So I decided to search it, I know what I'm looking for, and I want a damage control too. It automatically drops it into that low slot, and you can see my tank went up quite a bit, so it went up by about 7,000 hit points. And my CPU usage went up, but a damage control only uses one power grid. So 30 CPU and one power grid, so the power grid impact is negligible, which is good because I'm using most of my power grid already. But the CPU, it uses a significant amount of CPU. Now, for reasons I'm not going to get into, I'm going to shield tank this ship. So let me go ahead. The next thing that's on my priority list actually is to get a pair of gyro stabilizers on here for damage. I've got a lot of this memorized. So if you're like, how does Yuri know that? So I've spent days of my life in Pyfa. You don't have to do that to play Eve. My wife Lakiti doesn't use Pyfa at all, and she's still a very successful Eve player. But for me, this is like a recreational activity. I'm going to throw 2 gyros on there. And now I'm going to ask a question to the floor. Why am I throwing 2 gyros on here and not 3?
Diminishing returns?
Exactly. 3 points for you. So the first 2 gyros give me the most benefit. And then the third one only gives me about 50% of its overall benefit. So I want to use that because of that stacking penalty that we talked about. So I'm just going to throw 2 gyros on here to get the most bang for my buck. That's a joke. Alright, I want a propulsion module and I want some tank. So let me throw a propulsion module on here. And I want a micro warp drive. So 5MN is a small, 50 is a medium, and 500 is a large. So let me show you what happens if I try to put a large micro warp drive on this boat. It's not going to work well. I'm going to put a 500MN. I'm going to go with the compact one if I can find it. Here we go, a compact. So this is compact. Oh, it's low power grid usage. Check this out. So I put a overprop on here, and you can see I'm at 173% of my available power grid. So this does not fit. CPU wise, it's fine. I've still got 60% CPU utilized, so I have plenty of CPU left. But in terms of power grid, if I'm fitting a module that's too large, it takes up too much power. And that's the real problem that I have with oversized modules. Let's go with something more reasonable. Oh no! I'm still over on power grid. Oh dearie me. Well, let's press forward and then we'll fix that problem in a minute. So, tanking wise, you heard me mention, hopefully during the class, that it is common to put oversized tank on a ship. We are going to do that here. So this is a battle cruiser, but I'm going to put a large shield extender on it. Now I'm way over on power grid. Oh dear. And then let's fix that problem. This is going to be the power grid using things that we're going to want to have. By the way, you can see that my tank went up quite a bit. 29.6 up to 34.7, but not as much as when I put the damage control on. So okay, what are we going to do about this? Does anybody have any suggestions for how we're going to get our power grid back under control?
Low slots.
Hey, I'll take that. Let's get a reactor control. That's a low slot module. You can see that a reactor control does not require any power grid. It does require 16.5 CPU. So that reactor control has brought us back down to the point where we have a little tiny bit of power grid left over at the cost of some CPU and a valuable low slot. I'll show you another way we could have done this that's not nearly as good. Grab some engineering rigs. So if we stick two medium ancillary current routers on the ship, take up those two rig slots, that will also bring us down to below the power cap maximum again. So that's another option. But I want my precious rig slots for tank. So that's advanced concept here. I cannot use low slots for shield tank except power diagnostics, which are generally pretty weak for the amount of tank they give you. So those low slots are not as useful to me if I'm shield tanked. Whereas the rig slots I can use to put in shield tank. So those rig slots are very valuable to me for improving my shield tank, and I don't want to lose them to power grid when I can put in power grid in a low slot that is not as important. Advanced concepts. Cool. Alright, so what do I want to do next? I'm going to improve my tank by using some multi-spectrum shield hardeners. Okay, so now I'm up to 47.2K resists. But now, a very important thing to note is that my capacitor has been updated. So with max skills, my capacitor will last almost 4 minutes with everything running. And you can see check marks next to the active modules here. That's what that check indicates, is this is a module that you have to turn on. So for example, this large shield extender is always active. It doesn't need to be activated. It's a passive module, so I guess I should say it's always passive, but it's always turned on. Whereas the multi-spectrum shield hardener you have to actively turn on, and then you can see the capacitor usage here is 3.2. I don't know, 3.2 watts. I think gigajoules a second or something like that. But whereas this micro warp drive uses 13.5, so it uses quite a bit more power. So if I want to change the way I'm modeling things, and I do, I always want my shield hardeners running because I always want to be protected from bad stuff. So I want to have as much tank as possible. But I don't always need to run my micro warp drive, especially with a sniper fit like this. A lot of the time I can just sit there without my micro warp drive on. So what if I turn it off? You'll see now that my capacitor is stable at 74.1%. So I actually have a cap stable fit without running the micro warp drive. I'm going to leave it like that for now. Okay, so there's a couple different things we could do here. I think let's see here. So let's go with the fit I was thinking I was going to do. So I'm going to put some extra shield tank on in the rigs like I was talking about. and I have this memorized. So what I want a EM shield. I'm sorry, I should take a step back here. These are my resistances for each type of damage for shield, armor, and hull. So my shield resistances are 54% against EM, 63% against thermal, 72% against kinetic, and 77% against explosive. And my armor resists run quite the opposite. So they're 66, 45, 36, and 24 respectively. Whereas I've got a flat 60 for my hull. So what we say here is I've got an EM hull and my shield resists. My shield resists against EM damage are, in this case, 54%. So they're what, 23% worse than my explosive resists, and they're worse than the average overall. So I'm going to plug that EM hole with a medium EM shield reinforcer. And you see that brought it up to 62%. So we're sort of in line with the thermal resist. We still have an EM thermal hole, where we're going to be more vulnerable to lasers than we are to, say, projectile weapons. But it's better than it was. Then I'm going to throw 2 core defense field extenders on there, and those just give me straight up tank. They just give me more raw hit points. So I've thrown 2 extra defense extenders on here. So what do I have left? I've got 58k EHP, overall effective hit points. That's pretty good. I've got just under 500 damage, and I've got enough power grid and enough CPU that I can mess around with stuff. So there are a lot of things I can do from here. The one that what I want out of this boat, I'll show you one version and then I'll show you something cool and different. I want this to be a pure sniper. So what am I going to do for that? Well, I'm going to put a couple of tracking enhancers in the low slot. Now what does that do? Well, that increases my gun range. So if you see, I've got 22.4 plus 38.5. If I take that off of there, I've got a little bit worse range. I've also got better tracking. So I'm up to almost 10 tracking with 2 tracking enhancers. And again, because of stacking penalties, I'm only using 2. So now I've got a pretty good setup here. Okay. Let me say one more thing, and then I'm going to stop and take some questions, and then I'm going to keep going. So this character has all 5 skills and everything. That's the character I'm using. I'm not using Yuri. I'm using a theoretical character who's trained everything to level 5. Now I've got my sample character here that I use quite frequently. It's AWU Advanced Weapon Upgrades 4, Weapon Upgrades 4, Shield Upgrades 4, and Rigging 3. So if I switch to that character, I can see how things change. It's got 5 and everything else, but from a fitting perspective, now we're over on power grid. So if I'm thinking about the average Unista flying this ship, it's very common for people to only have that level of skills. And that means I need to think about what are they going to do in order to get enough power. And in this case, my preference with people who have questions is for them to compact the micro warp drive, like I was talking earlier. So we can right click on the micro warp drive and go to variations and say, let's pick compact. Oh no! 100.1%. Oh, tough. Didn't quite work. We're still slightly over on power grid even with the compact micro warp drive. So an obvious thing to do here would be, go back up to the quad LIF, and instead of compacting down, let's grab an implant. So I just happen to have a lot of this memorized, but I can do an inherit implant Squire Power Grid Management EG601. If I double click on it, it'll drop into my implants tab. And that brings me back down to an acceptable amount of power. I just have to run the implant and know that I'm going to lose an implant worth about 700,000 if I get potted. let's try another option. This large shield. So the easiest way to look at things is to look at what's taking up a lot of power and then mess with that. So there's not going to be any point in compacting something that's only taking 1 power, but we can compact this large shield extender. And that brings us down to the right amount of power at the cost of a couple thousand hit points. So that would be another option if I didn't want to use an implant, or if I already had a 600 or slot 6 implant in. I could compact down my shield extender, and that would get me under the power grid limit, so I'm back in good shape. I've said a lot of stuff. Now, let's take some questions.
Is there a good rule of thumb when deciding between an afterburner and a micro warp drive?
Yeah, for fleet PvP, you're almost always going to see micro warp drives, except if you're going bank robbing with clarity, because you can't use a micro warp drive inside the ESS bubble. So generally for fleets, you're not as worried about cap stability, because the fights aren't going to last long enough for you to run out of power. So you just want to go as fast as you can. You want to yeet as much as you can across the grid. There are exceptions though. First of all, if you know you're going to get scrammed, which is common in faction warfare, if you know you're going to be within scram range of your target, then there's no reason to have a micro warp drive, because the scram will turn off your micro warp drive, so you want an afterburner. The other is afterburners don't. So a micro warp drive blooms your sig radius. So you can see down at the bottom right here, my signature with my micro warp drive off is 310, which is already pretty big. But if I turn it on, my signature goes to 1,600 and 650. So my signature is enormously larger, and that makes me much, much easier to hit. So it's common, especially with small ships, to give them a micro warp drive and an afterburner. And what you'll do is you'll use your micro warp drive to burn into the target using correct spiraling, which I'm terrible at, and then orbit the target using your afterburner, which gives you some speed but doesn't bloom your signature radius and makes you very hard to hit because you've got high angular velocity. Unless they're shooting rapid light missiles at you, in which case you're going to die, because missiles don't care about tracking speed or angular velocity. Very long answer to that question, but did I kind of get there?
Yeah, I feel like that answers that question.
All right, what else y'all got for me? Okay, so I'm going to do something fun and special here. Let's say that I've decided I want links or command bursts on this ship, because it has a 1 command burst slot. Now I'm pretty happy with this fit here. This is a good fit. So rather than monkeying around with this one, I'm going to go ahead and hit the copy button here. So I've gone back to fittings. I'm going to hit copy. And I'm going to create a new fit called Pyfa class links. Oh no, it closed my old fit. That's rude. Well, how about this? I'll open a new tab. Now I've got my original fit, Pyfa class here. I can look at it. And then I can mess around with this one without losing my old one. So I'm going to want, I want to be tougher. So I'm going to put in some shield links. Uh-oh. All is not well. I've gone over on both CPU and power grid. Let me load the links and we'll see how much tank we got. Okay, so we got like 3k EHP. That's not very good. Let me try extension. Ah, okay, so an extension charge gives me what, 5,500 hit points, and anybody else in my fleet benefits from it as well with diminishing returns. So that's cool. So what am I going to do in order to sort out my problem with power grid and CPU? Well, there's a lot of things I can do, but let's try something specific and then we'll compare and see if it was a good idea or not. I'm going to drop this core defense field extender. Throw a current router on there. And then I'm going to drop one tracking enhancer. Ooh, not quite enough. Put it in a nanofiber, which as you can see costs 0 power grid and 0 CPU. And the last thing I'm going to do is compact my reactor control. So that gives me less power grid, but also takes up less CPU. And now I'm using 499 out of my 500 CPU, and I am a fraction of the power grid away from being maxed out. But I've got a command burst on here. So what has that done for me, if anything? Well, I've got less hit points. Let's look here. 58k EHP. I've got 24 or 22 km optimal plus 38 or 39 km fall off and 10 tracking if you round up. And my speed is 1422 and my align time is 11.2 or 8.02 seconds if I've got the micro warp drive off. Okay, so what do we got here? We got 55.8k EHP. So I've actually, despite putting a shield extension charge on here, I have lost about 2k EHP. This has not been a move in the correct direction for my overall tank. I've also lost range and tracking. My range and tracking are both worse with this new fit. On the other hand, I am a little bit faster. I've gained about 100 meters a second, and my align time is now 2 full seconds faster. So my previous align time was just over 8 seconds. My current align time is just under, well, far enough under 7 that it gets rounded up to 7. So I've gained a little bit of align time there. How are we doing so far? More questions? So there's an example of PvP fitting. Now let's finish the fit. I like the first one better. I'm going to finish the fit, and then I think I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Chris, if you want to take some time.
Yeah, sure.
All right, but let's finish this fit first. So what do I need to do? I need ammo. So I'm going to load some medium faction ammo in here. Now, here's a tricky thing you can do. Watch this. So long range to short range order. I've got EMPM, which is short range. So I've loaded a whole bunch of different types of ammo, and I can compare what they do and what their ranges are and what have you. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to load up short, medium, and long range ammo, EMP, depleted uranium, and nuclear respectively, and then I'm going to load some T2 ammo. Now if I look here, I've got 20 shots loaded into each gun, so I don't need a whole lot of ammo. Republic fleet ammo does 10% better than base ammo, so I always load for that extra 10% damage. I'm going to drop in some Tremor and some Quake. You can see the prices vary. So, now how much ammo do we want? Well, obviously I want to be able to load my guns multiple times. So if I say I want 5 full reloads of each type of ammo, and a full reload is 6 times 20 is 120, then I need 600 rounds in order to have 5 full reloads of each. So I can do that shift click trick again. Change selection quantity. Let me do that a little slower. And load 600 of each. So now I've got, and I'm going to clear these. So yeah, so that's good. I've got, well, did I do that right? I think I did that wrong. Yeah, I did the math wrong. I think I want 720, because I've got 6 times 20 is, oh geez, I can do this. 6 times 2 is 12, 120. Oh, then I've got 5 reloads. No, I'm good. I'm good. I'm going to be superstitious and add a little more ammo. There we go. Now I got lots of ammo. Not going to run out. And it's not that expensive, so that's cool. And you can see my cargo space is increased here because I put that in the cargo bay. We want some nanite repair paste. I'm going to arbitrarily put 100 in here. That's a decent number for a battle cruiser. And let's see, the only other thing I probably need to do is put in some drones. Actually, I'm going to do something sneaky in a second here. But first, let's get some drones. Oh, what kind of drones do I want? So I'm going to be hitting with a lot of explosive damage. So I want acolytes so that I'm doing EM damage to balance out the explosive damage. Right? Not probably hobgoblins because I'm going to do EM damage with the EMP ammo. And then I can left click on the red X to simulate 5 hobgoblins. You see I'm doing about 100 drone damage DPS with hobgoblins. Okay, one last cool thing to do for this fit in particular. See how my align time is just ever so slightly over 8 seconds? 8.02 seconds. Well, I happen to have memorized that there's an implant that improves your align time. So if I drop in this 1% align time implant, which cost me just under $1 million, sorry, can you all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. It cost me just under $1 million. That's dropped my align time from 8.01 to 7.94. As we were talking earlier, the game rounds up. So it's going to round my align time from 7.94 up to 8, whereas the 8.02 rounds up to 9. So now rather than 9-second align time, I've got 8-second align time, and it only cost me a 1 million implant. Advanced stuff. Down at the bottom here, we can see the cost of our ship. It's about 85 mil. Of that, 53 is the hull, 23 is the fit, and just under $1 million is the character, and we got some drones and some cargo. And that's a completed fit that we're going to fly tonight.